It's the winter of 1963, 10 o'clock at night. Father stoked the fire with the poker, prodding the embers together, piling wet coal on top. Not too much, just enough to keep it alive till morning. Get it right, and the fire's still glowing at 6. Get it wrong, and everyone wakes up freezing. If you grew up in 1960s Britain, that one small job before bed could make or break the next morning. It was one of a handful of nightly rituals every household performed to survive the cold. How many do you remember? Millions of homes in Britain still had the toilet outside in the 1960s, especially in terrace streets, not down the hall, but out the back door, across the yard, past the coal bunker in a little brick outhouse with a cistern on the wall. There might be a bare bulb if you were lucky, a candle if you weren't. In winter, that cistern froze solid. The water in the bowl froze too. The wooden seat was so cold it hurt. Families developed routines. Salt poured into the bowl at night, an old rug draped over the seat to stop it cracking. Some people turning the water off at the stopcock before bed and flushing the system dry so there was nothing left to freeze. When the temperature fell hardest, the chamber pot came back, kept under the bed, used in the dark, emptied first thing. Nobody liked it, but nobody fancied that sprint across a frozen yard at 2 in the morning either. Every morning, during a hard frost, the milk told you how cold the night had been. The cream inside the bottle froze solid and expanded, pushing the foil cap clean off the top. It sat an inch above the neck of the bottle, like a little frozen hat. You'd see those white-capped bottles on every doorstep. Sometimes the birds got there first, blue tits, especially, pecking the foil to reach the frozen cream. Families brought the bottles in and stood them in a pan of warm water until the cream softened enough to pour. During the big freeze of 1962 to 63, which began on Boxing Day and lasted until March, the milkmen could barely keep up. Roads became dangerous. Some abandoned their floats and delivered on foot, carrying crates through the snow with their boots sliding on the ice. They still came, every morning. There was a health price to that winter. Chilblains, red, swollen, unbearably itchy lumps on your toes, your fingers, sometimes your heels, were almost universal. Almost every child in 1960s Britain had them. They came from being frozen outside and then warmed too quickly by the fire. Your hands and feet would swell. The itching was unbearable. Mums had a dozen remedies. Rubbing them with raw onion, soaking feet in warm water with mustard, dabbing on calamine lotion if you could sit still long enough. Nothing really worked. You simply waited for spring. It was so common nobody treated it as unusual. Just what happened in winter. Central heating has all but wiped them out. Ask anyone under 40 and they won't know the word, but say it to someone who grew up in the 60s and watch their face. Before anything else, each winter morning someone had to deal with the fire. Cold ash from the night before was raked out of the grate and shoveled into a bucket. Grey dust rose no matter how careful you were. Then the fire was laid anew, scrunched newspaper at the bottom, thin sticks of kindling on top, arranged with gaps so air could move through, small pieces of coal placed last. One match, that was the rule. If the coal was damp, if the chimney wasn't drawing, if you'd packed it too tight, you started again in a room that was already freezing. This was the first job of every single day from October to March. You either did it yourself, or you stood and watched your father do it throughout your childhood. And the smell of that first fire catching, newspaper and coal smoke and cold air, was the smell of every winter morning. Almost nobody talks about it, but everyone who lived it remembers. Every household kept a bucket of fire ash by the front door, and every morning before anyone left the house someone scattered it across the pavement outside. There was no waiting for the council. You cleared your stretch of pavement and your neighbour cleared theirs. The whole street did it. If someone was elderly or unwell, the house next door did it for them. Nobody made a fuss about it. It was just what you did. People looked after their patch, and if everyone looked after theirs, the whole street stayed safe. Monday was wash day, and in winter wash day was a battle. Most families didn't get a washing machine until the late 1960s. Before that it was a copper boiler, a dolly tub, or a twin tub if you were modern. Even those with a machine still had to dry everything, and in the cold months there was nowhere for it to go but inside. The wooden clothes horse came out and stood in front of the fire. Sheets, shirts, school uniforms, vests, layer upon layer, draped over it while steam rose from everything. The house filled with the smell of warm, damp cloth and the windows ran with condensation. Some homes had a ceiling-mounted wooden air. You lowered it on a rope, loaded it up and winched it back to the ceiling where the warm air gathered. If the weather outside was freezing but dry, the washing still went out on the line. It came back frozen solid, shirts with the arms stiff and sticking out so you could barely bend them. You leaned garments against the fireguard to thaw and soften before folding. It sounds mad, but it worked. In a house that cold, food was more than supper, it was heating. You warmed yourselves from the inside because the house could not do it from the outside. There was porridge every morning, made with water and a bit of sugar. Stews that sat on the fire all afternoon, shin beef, carrots, onions, potatoes, and an OXO cube to stretch the gravy. The same pot could start on Sunday and still be going by Wednesday, topped up with whatever was left in the cupboard. Bread and dripping got you through the gaps. The fat saved from the roast spread thick on slices with a pinch of salt. And last thing at night, a cup of cocoa or Horlicks before bed because going to sleep warm made all the difference. The coal fire heated one room, the living room. Everything else was cold. The kitchen was bearable if the oven had been on. The hallway was drafty. The bedrooms were freezing. So where you sat in that one warm room mattered. Dad's chair was closest to the fire, always. Mum's was next. Children sat on the rug or the floor, backs against the settee, feet stretched toward the flames. One side of you roasted, the other side froze. You'd sit for 20 minutes, then turn around to warm your back. People genuinely rotated themselves in front of that fire, like toast under a grill. When the telly arrived, it made things worse. The set was against one wall, the fire on another, and you couldn't face both, so you sat sideways, half watching, half warming, and nobody was ever quite comfortable. The 1960s still carried the legacy of smoke. The Clean Air Act had passed in 1956, but smog didn't disappear overnight. In December 1962, London was hit by a severe smog that killed 750 people. You couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Cars were abandoned in the road, buses could barely move, and planes were grounded. The thick yellow-grey fog drifted through open doors and into buildings. You could smell it in theatres and concert halls. Children walked to school with scarves pulled across their faces, breathing cold smoke with every step. By the late 1960s, smog like that was finally dying out. But if you were there in the early years of the decade, you remember what it tasted like, and you won't forget the city falling silent because nobody could see where they were going. If you are a woman who grew up in the 1960s, you knew the Liberty bodice before I even described it. A thick, fleecy sleeveless vest with rubber buttons that were almost impossible to fasten with cold fingers. Every child wore one, over the vest and under everything else. Vest, Liberty bodice, shirt, jumper, cardigan, coat, worn indoors without a second thought. The answer to every complaint of cold was to put another jumper on. There was nothing to turn up. The Liberty bodice was produced in its millions and kept going right through the decade. Most children hated it. Most mothers wouldn't let you leave the house without it. On a bitter January morning, with frost ringed on the inside of the windows and the fire not yet lit, you were quietly grateful for every scratchy inch. Sunday night brought the ritual of the bath. The bathroom was the coldest room in the house, unheated, with a tiled floor, and the window rattled every time the wind blew. Getting enough hot water usually meant boiling kettle after kettle on the stove, or waiting an hour or more for the back boiler behind the living room fire to do its work. Some families lit a paraffin heater half an hour beforehand to take the edge off the chill. The bath was shared in order, Dad first, because the water was hottest and cleanest, then Mum, then the children, eldest to youngest. By the last child, the water was grey, lukewarm and with a ring round the edge. Nobody argued about it. Everyone knew the order and got on with it. The rest of the week you washed at the kitchen sink, a flannel, a bar of Lifebuoy soap, and a basin of hot water. Sunday night was the big event. The whole house smelled of soap and damp towels drying on the fireguard. A portable paraffin heater stood in millions of British bedrooms and bathrooms through the 1960s. You trimmed the wick, lit it with a match, and adjusted the flame. Then came the smell, that thick,